live.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Bear Dash. I'm your host, Jasper Sundin of the Daily Californian.
I'm Shailin.
And we are all things Cal football. Spring camp has started. We're ready to get into it. In the goods of our good friend Joshua, and let's go. Let's get this underway. First of all, we wanted to lay down the gauntlet. We haven't done any math, but we're here. We're on average, I think the longest haired daily Bear Dash or Dash Sports hosting team. And so on that note, we're going to get this underway and we're going to talk all things Cal football as they return to spring camp this week. So Shane, the Bears are finally back in action. They've had more practices in spring than they had all of last year due to COVID cancellations. I think this is nice for everyone. It's a return to normalcy in a way. And even though we're not able to be there and watch the games, we do have some updates. First things first, though, the Bears finally fill their hiring position. They got a new coach, Trey Watson, to coach defensive backs. Break it down. Who is this guy? What's he doing in Cal?
Yeah, so it's been really interesting because as we know, with great success in college football comes a lot of changes. And even though Cal's secondary has been their most dominant and most consistent position group, probably on both sides of the football over the past 3 or 4 years, Cal now has its second defensive backs coach in 2 years. So Marcel Yates was here for 2020, and that's it. So Trey Watson comes in, and the first thing right off the bat for me is just how young he is as a coach. He's only 29 years old, but apart from that, he's only spent 3 years as a true football coach. So he spent 2018 and 2019 as a graduate assistant at Oregon, and then spent last year as the DB's coach at UNLV. So he's very fresh in the college coaching realm, but he's received great praise from his peers and other coaches alike. And I think having that youth really brings some energy to a very experienced and veteran Cal defensive coaching staff.
Yeah, he's definitely new. And I think on the surface that this has to look like a bit of a nervy hire from Justin Wilcox, especially for Cal fans who are used to seeing very productive, very dominant defensive backs units. I mean, Marcel Yates, who they brought in last year, was a veteran, I think, in any and every way. He's a former defensive coordinator at the college level. He's a name that people know. He's on block. Trey Watson is the opposite of that in a lot of ways. Like you said, very new, only a few years of coaching experience, and 2 of those were as a graduate assistant at Oregon. I mean, that's almost as new as it gets. But one person he's not new to is Justin Wilcox. Wilcox coached him back at Washington in 2012 and 2013 when Wilcox was the defensive coordinator there. One of our friends, Jesse Stewart, pointed that out in his brief on Watson at the Daily Californian. And so it bears in mind that this is not unfamiliar territory for Wilcox. Wilcox has seen Watson in action. Well, he hasn't seen him as a coach per se up close. He has seen his defensive ability and also, I mean, what kind of guy he is. When you coach players, you get a chance to really get to know him. And so don't doubt that Wilcox knows who he's hiring. That is definitely true.
Yeah, and I just want to add on that he came to Washington as a walk-on. So Coach Wilcox saw the progression from a walk-on to someone who was eventually a very necessary part of their rotation. And that's where you can see how Coach Wilcox saw Watson's work ethic going from that type of player who was not very well known at all into someone that Wilcox could rely on.
Absolutely. I will say his coaching record so far isn't fantastic. There's not much of it. He was coaching last year at UNLV, who frankly had a terrible season. They went 0-6. It's tough to find a lot of teams that had a worse record than Cal last season, but the Rebels did manage it. That being said, their defense was abysmal. Their passing defense was not the worst part of their game. Their running defense was worse in the Mountain West, but their passing defense was not in the basement. And that all came when the team lost 2 of their best defensive backs this season prior. They had guys who graduated, guys who moved on. And so I think, again, like on paper, this looks nervy. You're bringing in a guy from an 0-6 program, and not an 0-6 Power 5 program, an 0-6 Group of 5 program. But again, there are things to look beyond there. There are things to look more closely at. There are things to to be thankful for and to look forward to. I also think a key part of this hire, for me at least, is that this is going to bring some stability to the position. Like you said, this is going to be the third defensive backs coach at Cal in 3 years, and that's not really something you ever want. Like you said, college football coaching, that's an ever changing situation. You never can really take anything for granted. But Cal has had 2 guys leave the last 2 seasons, Gerald Alexander and Marcel Yates, who have done good jobs in those positions. Watson provides an opportunity. Yes, he's young. Yes, he's new. But that means no one's really going to be snatching him up, right? He's not someone who's going to get tugged a bunch of different places. There's an opportunity for him to stay here, to build a really successful unit, and maybe the same way a guy like Gerald Alexander did, and to provide some long-term mentorship for some of these younger safeties and cornerbacks that Cal has.
And I think that's a really important part of what he brings as a very young coach, because like you just said, there's so many younger guys in this secondary, especially with Cam Bynum gone. You lose a lot of leadership, and guys like Isaiah Young, Colin Gamble, Tyson McWilliams, even the very new guys like Caleb Higgins, they're going to need that type of mentorship and development. And Watson can provide that as someone who's young and can help relate to those guys. I mean, he said himself that he sees himself as an older brother, but also draws the boundary between being a friend and being a coach. But I think for those really young players, having someone that maybe you're not so scared or nervous about talking to or messing up in front of will really help their development. And then, of course, you have guys like Elijah Hicks and Josh Drayden who can also help mentor those younger guys. But I really look at Watson's youth as a beneficial thing rather than a hindrance on his capabilities. And in his interviews, he seemed very humble and grateful for the opportunity. He didn't seem like, he should have had this type of position long ago or anything like that. He's just really eager to get to know everyone. He's been working a lot with players on their technique so far, but Wilcox obviously said he's still learning the playbook and terminology himself, which is why Coach Wilcox did coach the defensive backs room while they were in the hiring process, and also is continuing to help out in that regard right now.
Yeah, and I think it bears in mind, like you said, his youth is going to be an asset, especially coming out of COVID-19. You have freshmen who have never really experienced a quote unquote normal season, a normal off season. And I mean, that's now incoming freshmen, and that's now guys who were freshmen last season. You just have a lot of people who are unfamiliar with the way things should work. And instead, Wilcox is bringing in a guy who can relate to them, bring them through this. I mean, we often forget, like, they're playing football during a really chaotic time in a lot of people's lives. And someone who can steady that ship, both in the long term at that position and in the short term, just sort of get guys through the day to practice it. That's important, and that's not something that should be easily discounted. Maybe be a bit of a stretch to say Watson can be that guy, that he can sort of guide people that way, because we haven't seen him get out there and do it. But like you said, there's definitely opportunity for that to happen.
Yeah, and either way, I still expect Cal's secondary to remain an elite unit. They were during the Gerald Alexander era. They were, again, one of the best in the Pac-12 last season, and I don't think that's going to change, especially with a lot of the seniors coming back. But moving on to what is actually happening during camp. We ran into this issue in the fall, and it's the same thing. We are not actually allowed to attend these camps. So a lot of this speculation is from interviews, what coaches and players are telling us, as well as what Cal Athletics releases themselves. Sometimes they put out little Instagram videos that give us a little glimpse as to what's happening on the field. And then there's also some other organizations that may or may not spy from the side of a mountain into the stadium and get a little inside scoop. But camp is progressing well. There's 8 days through out of total of 15 spring camp practices. It's set to continue morning with the 9th, but they're onto full contact now. Lots of scrimmaging and live scenarios. They started with just helmets, and then you work your way up. Helmets and shoulder pads, full pads plus contact. So now they've reached that level, and it's a battle. Like, everyone's hitting each other. You get to see a lot of that added physicality from off-season strength and conditioning and nutrition programs. And all in all, it would be very fun to watch. So it's unfortunate that we can't. But here we're going to be talking about the offense because as excited as we were for Bill Musgrave's offense in 2020, um, due to a lot of things out of his control and some execution issues, Cal's offense was again terrible statistically in the Pac-12, just 11th in points per game. So this season they're going to be looking to make a huge improvement, and that starts with being in camp and implementing more concepts and expanding the playbook. Because, like Musgrave said, they had a very limited playbook due to the lack of practice that they were allotted. So it's going to be really interesting to see how far of a stride Cal's offense can take during this camp.
Yeah, I think that's the number one thing on a lot of people's minds. And I think you hear it every time Bill Musgrave talks, every time he has an interview, every time, probably every time he thinks about something. It's now he's going to have a full spring. He's going to have a chance to work with this offense to implement his playbook fully. And what does that mean? What can he do? I mean, can this finally be the turning point that Justin Wilcox are? I mean, this is a question we've been asking. I think every year Wilcox has been a coach. Can the offense step up to the defense's level? I remember we were talking to Mike Safel before last season, and he acknowledged, I mean, this is a team that people say the defense carries, and that's not something I think Safel wanted as his starting center. You never want to hear that if you're on the offensive side of the ball. So this is the opportunity to change that up. Whether they do or not it still remains to be seen. But the opportunity is definitely there. Musgrave has talked a little bit about, adding gimmicks, making things a little funkier, making things a little fresher. Last season, it was very bare bones, which I think he has said a lot of people have observed. And even then, we saw Cal doing some different things. Chase Garbers, especially in that game against Oregon State, targeting the sidelines more, going deep. The Bears have an opportunity to do more of that. From what little we know of spring camp, we've seen them start to involve more younger players, to get freshmen involved, get people running longer routes, get kind of fast, speedier guys in there. Ashton Stredick is a name that stuck out to me when I was sort of going through that, looking at who's performed so far as maybe a third running back option. He's really fast, a walk-on guy, but a lot of people are excited to see what he might be able to do. And it's just clear that Musgrave is taking a wide approach to this. He's giving a lot of players reps, a lot of players opportunities. He's said as much himself. But I think there's a lot of things to be excited for.
Yeah, I don't know about a third running back option just because of how crowded the running back room is right now. Like when you talk about running backs, I mean, your first three, in my opinion, have to be CBJ, Damian Moore, and Marcel Dancy because those guys are the veterans. But like you said, there's people like Ashton Stredick, Chris Street, DeCarlos Brooks. Like the running back room is loaded right now. And I think spring camp is going to be a time where coaches are more just evaluating what they have in each player. From what we've gathered from interviews and stuff, it seems like spring is really an evaluation and developmental period. And then when fall camp runs around, I think that's when they start thinking more of the type of ordering the depth chart, who's going to play where, that type of more logistical stuff. I think right now it's very experimental. A lot of players are playing new positions in the spring. The coaches are really just trying to see what they have. And I think that's the same with the running back. So it could be that Ashton Stredick just goes off in the spring and then he does have a shot at the third running back role. But we really don't know what's going to happen right now. But I want to move on to the quarterbacks, the highlight of any offense, any good offense at least. And why don't we start with Jaden Casey? That's one player lost from the quarterback's room. What was the deal? He entered the transfer portal. He didn't play in any games for Cal, but what are the Bears losing in him?
Yeah, I mean, you talked about us being not sure about a lot of things. One thing I think people are very sure about is, or trying to become more sure about, is that second spot, that number 2 quarterback. Chase Garbers is clearly the number 1 guy. I think Casey's transfer and Modster's transfer earlier in the spring solidified that completely. I mean, Garbers is going to be the starter. It's a senior season. He's the guy to beat, and he's the guy who Cal's going to use to beat other teams. Casey's transfer, I think, has a lot of ramifications for the number 2 guy. Casey is a guy I've been high on since he came in, but I mean, I think he never really he never really was up. I don't want to say he was never really up to it because this is a talented Cal quarterback's room, but he never had the impact I think that I thought he would have. The guy that's really shown up in his stead is Zach Johnson. Same year as Casey, he was a guy who was dressing a lot more. When we were at the big game this last season, Cal lost to Stanford, but Johnson was the guy who was suited up. He was on the field as the fourth string quarterback, I'm sorry, behind Mod Strurell and Garbers over guys like Brash and Casey who are on the sidelines. So I think Casey's transfer just makes Johnson's case that much clearer. He also had a great performance in the Bears scrimmage just the other day, threw for a handful of touchdowns and had the most reps of any quarterback on Cal's roster. And again, this is spring. That doesn't mean Johnson's going to take the world by storm, but he's the guy who both stands to benefit and is potentially the reason that Casey is transferring.
Yeah, Zach Johnson was extremely impressive based on the stat line. I mean, the coaches told not to look too far deep into the stat line, but when someone goes 13 for 15 with 4 touchdowns and no interceptions, like that is absurd efficiency, even if it is a spring ball scrimmage, because Garbers had a lot worse numbers. Again, we're not looking too much into it. Garbers is the clear starter, and it will likely remain that way heading into the season opener. But Zach Johnson, I think, really has a really good shot at getting that number 2 spot. He's also a pretty mobile quarterback. Bill Musgrave said that he's almost as fast as Chase Garbers, if not as fast. And we know how strong Garbers is with his feet. I mean, the reason Cal was able to stay in so many games over the past couple seasons is because Garbers has the ability to extend plays with his feet and also take off on the run when he needs to. So I know, Jasper, you were pretty high on the Spencer Brash train, but I think it's going to be a good battle for the number 2 spot. I think either of them could come out on top. And like I said earlier, I don't think that's something they're going to decide during spring. I don't even know if that's something they'll decide until the week before the season opener. So all that remains to be seen.
Absolutely. There's still a lot of time. And there's still another quarterback who's going to enter the fray. Kai Milner, a 4-star recruit from Cal's recruiting class this season, is going to be on campus in the fall. And he's another guy who, I mean, Musgrave's going to look at. Musgrave said he's coming into this with an open mind. He's counting on the players to prove themselves, to show that they want to work for this, that they want this position. And I mean, Milner's a guy we've heard a lot about. Milner's a guy who, I mean, clearly had recruiters and scouts excited. So it's another name to toss into the mix. And I don't know, it's going to be an exciting offseason. It's been a while since we've had, I think, a real quarterback controversy at Cal. And though this is nowhere near the starting position, it's still going to be interesting to speculate on who's going to take that number 2 spot. I think by extension, B. Garber's heir apparent heading into next season.
Definitely. And in terms of talking about some of those freshmen, one of the early enrollees was Jermaine Terry, tight end. And we knew how highly recruited he was. He chose Cal over pretty much any other school he could have wanted to go to be honest. And I did not realize how – I knew he was big. I knew he was physical. But when I looked at the roster and saw he was 6'4", 275 pounds, I was like, oh, my goodness. And the reason why I looked it up in the first place is because Cal Football posted a video of him catching a touchdown during one of the live drills, 7-on-7, I believe it was. It might have been 11-on-11, but just looking at him out there, he looks just like a monster as not even a true freshman. I mean, I guess he's considered a true freshman, but this upcoming fall will be his true freshman season. And he's already just towering over people and just bullying people. And he's only had, 8 practices in his college football career. But just seeing the type of potential you can get out of a guy with that frame, it's really exciting, especially because tight ends have always been kind of on the back burner in terms of Cal offense. I mean, I guess every position kind of is, because no one has that great of no one has great production on the Cal offense. But I'm really intrigued to see how Jermaine Terry progresses from now until the fall. And some other younger skill players, uh, in terms of receivers, one was Tommy Christakos, who apparently has been a very good deep threat for Cal throughout camp so far. He's caught a few deep balls, and he's really someone who could try to break into that rotation of receivers that's going to be probably going 6 or 7 deep each game. There's also Jeremiah Hunter, who's made some flashy catches so far in camp. He was expected to play a role in 2020. I know me and you were kind of hyping him up through part of fall camp, but unfortunately he missed the season due to injury, and we haven't really been able to see what he can bring to the team. So I think those are two younger guys, along with Jermaine Terry, who can really prove themselves this spring and get a crack at getting some real snaps in the fall.
Yeah. And I mean, we've talked a lot about how exciting, I mean, Cal's rising pass catchers are. Maven Anderson, J. Michael Sturdivant are two names we've thrown around a lot. You're not going to get tired of hearing about them because I'm sure they're going to be amazing next season. But a lot of the guys who are young players, freshmen, sophomores now, I mean, have got to be thinking like, hey, there's all this hype, but Makai Polk's gone. There's an open spot on the roster. Why not me? Why shouldn't I take it? Why shouldn't I step up? And that's what you're going to see. I mean, these guys are all hungry. No one's standing in place. And I wouldn't expect any of the wide receivers on Cal's roster to do the same. They've had a couple guys transfer, and I mean, those spots are up for grabs, and they're by no means spoken for. So that's something to look forward to. We've talked a lot about offense, though. It's time to focus on the other side of the ball. And to be frank, Cal's more dominant side of the ball. Let's talk some defense in fall camp 2021. Shailin, again, obviously, we're not there, and that makes it even harder with defense because stats are a poor representation of defenders' ability. But what have we seen so far, or rather heard so far, from our various sources in Cal football?
Well, one thing that really stood out to me that Coach Wilcox said was that the team as a whole, so this isn't just defense, but I think it applies more so defensively when you look at Cal's strengths and weaknesses, is that the team as a whole has gotten a lot bigger over the offseason. They've gained collectively over 650 pounds as a team. And I think just watching Cal last year, especially against UCLA and even against the run against Oregon State, I mean, Cal was atrocious against the run. And I think putting on that type of weight and muscle will just go leaps and bounds in improving Cal's tackling, because there were so many missed tackles, so many times where it seems like a Cal defender was going to bring someone down and then the opponent just breaks the tackle. And I think adding that extra muscle is just going to help finish those plays. And they didn't really get into specifics as to who was gaining what weight. And a lot of it was just, it wasn't any one player gaining, 40 pounds over the offseason. It was a lot of like incremental 5 to 10 pound increases for these players. But one person who did gain a lot of weight was Trey Pastor, who is going to be moving from safety to inside linebacker. He has never actually played a pure linebacker position. He was always in the secondary, but he's an athletic guy, very physical. He's up to 225 pounds at 6'2" now. And he's a guy who's super experienced in pass coverage, obviously because of his background, but the coaches really like where his body's at and think he can be really strong against the run as well. And from what they've said, he's playing well. He's learning his new keys and stuff. Not everything's the same as it was playing safety, but they say he's adjusting well and is playing faster and faster every practice.
Yeah. And Trey Pastor, I think he's just sort of the latest piece in a trend we've seen from the Bears, which is to display a lot of positional variability. Cam Good, who had an amazing season last year at outside linebacker, is going to be playing some of the star position, which in itself is kind of a nebulous, tough to pin down role. I mean, he's a guy who's going to be kind of a bit of everywhere, a bit of a linebacker, a bit in the secondary, and a bit of pass rushing, which he clearly does very well. I think like the move with Trey Pastor, we saw this with Elijah Hicks last season. If they can do these well, and now they have a full camp, right, a full on to get these guys up to speed on these sort of new positions with their new rules. We saw that didn't quite work out at the beginning of the season with Elijah Hicks, but now that there's more time, it's going to make Cal that much harder to defend. I mean, when you're preparing for a game, you got to be like, all right, Cam Good. I got to be watching out for this guy. And now you don't even know where he's going to come from. Now you have no way to pin down like a solid role on the field. I mean, Trey Pastor's going to be able to do the same thing. He's gotten bigger, but is he covering the run? Is he dropping to cover the pass? Is he going to blitz you? Like, you're just not going to know. And having guys that can do different things in different roles is going to make the Bears a lot harder to defend. It's something that I think Wilcox loves. That's something that they've always tried to do, to be adaptable, to be maneuverable, and moving Trey Pass to that position, moving Cam Good around the field is just, I think, the latest instance. And the Bears, I mean, we've talked about the offense getting a little trickier, and Musgraves had more time, but the defense said, again, why not us? Like, why shouldn't we do that too?
No, and there's another example of that is that from what it sounds like, again, this is classic Cal football coaches are always very speculative. They don't want to give their opponents, understandably, any advantage. But from what it sounds like, it seems like Coin Dang is going to be moving more towards playing almost full-time at outside linebacker rather than inside linebacker. And we saw him play both positions last season. Against Stanford in the big game, he primarily outside, and he did well. And with his 6'6" frame, he's putting on a lot of weight. They see him as a guy who can drop back into coverage, but can also be really hard to block off the edge because of his frame and speed combination. And also, by moving Coin to the outside, it frees up space for Evan Tattersall and Mo Iosefa to start, both of whom had pretty good seasons in 2020. So I think that flexibility from Coin Dang, and like you said, Cam Good, those are both guys who have NFL aspirations. And from what we know about the NFL draft, having players who can do multiple things only helps improve your draft stock. So that's going to be huge. And then sticking with the outside linebackers and also the theme of putting on weight, Oren Patu is a young player who has been really good so far in camp. He had 2 sacks and a pass breakup in the scrimmage. And he's just, with that added weight, apparently been doing really well in one-on-one pass situations. And it's going to be interesting to see how this whole linebacker setup changes throughout the season, who's getting what reps, because I think we can all agree, because of these unique circumstances, this is probably the deepest Cal team either of us have ever seen, because you have all these super seniors who traditionally would not be coming back. So there's only so many reps to go around, so many in-game snaps to go around, but there's going to be a lot of players who can go out there and compete and play well.
Yeah. It almost feels like every position has just a wealth of opportunity, a wealth of options. I mean, Trey Pastor's moving from safety to middle linebacker, but that really, I mean, Cal is still too deep in the safety position. I mean, it's remarkable how much talent Cal has back in the secondary. You think moving one of your most talented freshmen, one of the 3 freshmen who played in all 4 games last season, out of the position would maybe make you a little shorthanded, make it a little bare bones, and it definitely didn't. Like you said, Cal has a ton of players. Raymond Woody III is a new addition. He's a transfer who's coming at safety. He's already showing up in practice. He's already done well, even though he's still learning the terminology and the coaches are still learning what he can do. I mean, he's already started to show up. Daniel Scott was a really solid option, really understated, really, I think, undervalued last season, and he's not going anywhere. He's going to be back there performing. Elijah Hicks is going to have an offseason to get better at that. And Craig Woodson is a guy we've been talking about, it feels like forever, but is somehow still is like 2 years of eligibility. I mean, it's absolutely mind-blowing, just the wealth of riches that Cal has in the secondary.
Yeah, and we're running out of time because we don't have an entire section for them. I'm just going to do a quick one-hitter on the special teams. This is going to make you cringe, but I feel like we have to say it because it was, something that was very definitive of Cal's 2020 season. But apparently, from the people spying from the hills, Cal had a couple blocked field goals in their camp. So that's not a good sign.
That's never what you want to be hearing. I mean, Chase Garbers also threw, I think, an end zone TD this week, or an end zone interception this week. I'm sorry, which will, I'm sure, give Cal fans plenty of flashbacks to that Oregon State game. Yeah, special teams is something that Cal knows it needs to fix. They've had 3 kicks blocked against Stanford the last couple seasons. But like Shailin said, we're running low on time, so take those special teams nightmares with you tonight, Bear fans. Don't let them go anywhere. I know Wilcox and his staff certainly won't. But thanks for sticking with us for another week. We'll be back in a couple weeks' time to update you on the end of spring camp and give you all things Cal football. In the meantime, I think we should be adding another host. Jesse Stewart will be joining us from the Daily Californian. But folks, it's been a pleasure. As always, in the words of our good friend Justice De Los Santos, stay hydrated and have a good evening.